Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, our second day of programming for our 2022 Creative Tech Week. Before we get started, I just want to thank all of our speakers, our collaborators within ArtCenter, Maggie Hendry, Robbie Knock. I'm not sure for those who are in person if you've had a chance to meet Max Hillary, but Max is a phenomenal addition to the ArtCenter community and has done an incredible job supporting and organizing this entire week of programming. And we could not have done it without Max. So I want to begin with gratitude and just thank Max for all of his incredible work. It's my pleasure today to introduce a dear friend and longtime collaborator named Safir Bellali. He has curated this remarkable day of programming, and Safir has worked with the college. He's a graduate of our transportation design program. Prior to that, he received an engineering degree in Morocco. Safir has hired interns, recruited sponsored projects. He was the senior digital or advanced digital creation director at VF Corp for many years, is faculty at ArtCenter, has a deep commitment to improving access to creative education around the world, particularly in the global South, and is a design leader, an innovator, and remarkable human. So I'm going to turn it over to Safir. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Kristine. This is very nice of you. It's always humbling to be introduced by people you respect, and it's a pleasure of mine to be with you today. Speaking about gratitude, I think it's important for each one of us to be grateful for having the opportunity to be here together, to be able to exchange ideas, to exchange thoughts, and work together to improve not only the way we do things as a society or as a culture, but also give opportunity. And communicating, exchanging ideas, learning, teaching is definitely part of this. So thank you all for making time for these conversations. I'd like to welcome those who braved the elements. Yesterday was pretty unusual for Southern California, but thank you for those who made it here in person for day 3 of Creative Tech Week. I would also like to welcome those who are tuning in from as close as Pasadena and as far as Morocco. I think we may have some global audience today, which I think is really exciting. Finally, I would like to welcome to the stage an amazing 3D artist who's been, I'm sure, an inspiration to many of us, and who will kick us off for our Advanced Digital Creation Day, Bryant Jr.
Thank you so much, Safir. I have to say, this campus is absolutely amazing, and the people here are so warm and so inviting. So thank you, ArtCenter. So a lot of people know about digital creation. Some people know about analog creation, film photography, old school, if you will, and sometimes those two disciplines can compete. And this whole presentation is about not necessarily a this versus that. It's a how can we pull the strengths from all of these genres and use those techniques to create something special and unique. So I'm going to be diving into a lot of my work, who I am, where I'm from, how did I end up in Silicon Valley, and we're going to dig really deep into tech as well as principles. So this is sort of the structure of how we're going to talk about that. And first, who am I? I mean, I'm talking, but who am I, right? Then I'm going to get into photography. I have a strong passion for digital creation. I have a strong passion for analog creation, and photography is maybe one of the oldest forms of capturing memories. Then we're going to delve a little forward into the future and talk about 3D, visual effects, cloth simulations, smoke simulations, all of that good stuff, materials, lighting, animation, all of the good stuff. Then we're going to go into fashion. I have a very strong affinity for fashion. Safir was at Vans, and I love Vans, by the way. Shout out to VF Corporation. And we're going to talk about how fashion has been influenced by this digital creation. Back then, there was many options to handcraft, so sewing, to cutting, to pattern making, to designing. And now we have some of those tools in the digital realm. So we have tools like Marvelous Designer, Clo 3D, Houdini even. And we can do all of these things with the push of a button and see our design and our imagination in real time. Then I'm going to talk about the future. Everybody's talking about the metaverse. What is that? Now we have an omniverse. What is that? And what are all these verses? And how can we use those things in order to communicate, to share our expressive art? And how can we push society forward? And then we're going to close. So who am I? My name is Bryant Jr. I'm currently a 3D artist at NVIDIA. It's one of the biggest tech companies that's responsible for things like GPUs, DPUs, CPUs, any PU you can think about. NVIDIA's probably created it. So what I do there is I try to bring an aesthetic to the visuals that really marry the tech, the power of its tech with the power of its visual. And before we can get too far into the future or even the present, we have to find where we've come from. So for me, it's here. Starts here, this guy. In a humble place in North Carolina, small town called Kinston, if you will. That's where I started. And I have to tell you, at the age of 6, I couldn't stop drawing. From crayons to colored pencils to regular pencils to charcoal. I just couldn't stop. It's been a passion and obsession of mine almost since day one. So I went to school, and let me give you a really funny story. I grew up in a single parent home, and there was no computers in my house, like none. My mom was not about tech at all. So one day I saw a film called Toy Story. And up until then, I'm used to cartoons. I'm used to the Smurfs. I'm used to Care Bears. I'm used to Transformers. But Toy Story was different. Somehow it was art, but it was real, but not real. And I was fascinated. I had to know more about that. So I enrolled in a local college in Kinston, North Carolina, thinking, I'm going to learn 3D. I'm going to learn animation, and I'm going to make the next Toy Story. So I enrolled. I enrolled into a graphics, arts, and imaging technology because I thought that was visual effects. A year and a half in, I go to my advisor and I ask her, hey, I'm learning about Dreamweaver and Flash and all of these really cool web design tools and graphic design tools, but when am I going to make a character move? And she said, oh yeah, we don't do that. So a year and a half in, I'm like, okay, guess I'm not going to be making the Toy Story 2 film. But then I found a school in Raleigh, North Carolina called Living Arts College, and they did teach 3D animation. So of course, I did whatever I could to scrape my pennies together, working at Dunkin' Donuts in the graveyard shift to make sure I could find a way to do 3D. I graduated with a degree in 3D animation. Yay! Thank you. In North Carolina, it's not a huge scene for 3D or visual effects. So me, fresh out of school, what am I gonna do? I have to get out of the house, and now I have to work. So what do I do? First thing I did was find a kiosk in the local mall And that kiosk allowed me to do caricatures of passerby. So a customer would come by, buy something at the kiosk, and I persuaded this owner in the back here to let me draw those customers. And at the time, I wasn't getting rich, maybe $2, maybe $5, but it was enough to finance my amazing PB&J and bologna sandwich menu. So that's what I did for a while until I started doing illustrations, characters for comics at that time, Wolverine and Spider-Man. Well, I mean, they're still really, really important now, but back then it was a really big thing. So I just went all in. So then I made a little bit more money. So then I moved up to the ham and cheese. So you can imagine I'm like in the bathroom with my plush robe thinking that I've made it. I did not make it. I did not make it at all. So what do we do next? I get a job at a photo studio, a very traditional photo studio. At the time, the name of it is Olin Mills. And if you know anything about Olin Mills, you'll know that it's probably the most traditional photo studio you can find. I mean, we're talking 3-point light setup. You have your model posed here. You do not move the lights at all. There is no creativity except you're posing those peoples, and that is their way. About a year into doing that, I realized something, and that was the lights that I'm seeing in this studio are very similar to the lights that I'm seeing in 3D packages. So then something inside me clicked. And then I went home and I popped up in Maya and I realized, oh my God, that light that I can't move at work, I can move them anywhere here. So then that became an obsession of mine, moving lights around, changing materials, trying to figure out how I can be creative with this newfound tool. I don't know why it hadn't clicked before, but now I was off to the races. So film photography, let's talk about that for a second. There are pros and cons to film photography. I'm going to talk about a few of the pros first. First, there's a romance that you get with film photography, and there's a tactile attachment that you have to it. For example, here's a negative that I took with the Hasselblad, and I even left the little stray hair. You see that over there? Yep. I left that in for real because in 3D, what do? You add those dust and scratches. In real life, you have to remove those dust and scratches. But this is where it comes from. And I love those things. We zoom in closer. Now we have the positive of that. And this I've created in the darkroom. I've allowed the chemicals to develop the film. And this is what we end up with. And look really closely at the film grain. This is not digital noise. This is real chemicals sloshing together, creating this amazing, relatable, natural, organic look. And this was what I was searching for. It's so beautiful. It's so amazing. And that's film photography. So what about digital photography? If film photography is so amazing, why not keep doing it? Why even bother with digital photography? Let's go over a couple of the cons with film photography. One, over time, it can be pretty expensive. You think about the chemicals. Once you've used those chemicals to develop your film, you have about 10 to maybe 12 rolls before you have to discard those chemicals, buy new chemicals, and do it all over again. Again, that process is amazing, and I love it because you're really getting your hands dirty and you're really crafting something with your hands in real life, and I love that part. The second con is time. You know how you can take a photo and then show your friend? No, you don't do that in film. It's a process. You have to take those rolls back to the darkroom, develop those films, but then you're not done because now you have to scan those negatives. Once you scan them, now you can start retouching them. Now you can start removing those dust and scratches. You can start removing any imperfections that you want. So in a commercial space, sometimes you don't have that luxury of time. Sometimes you need to deliver something really, really quickly. And in that case, digital photography is where you want to be. So here I'm shooting the Apple Air Max Pro. And this is one of the reasons why digital photography is amazing in its own way. With 100 megapixels, I can get super, super close and study these details, study the fabric, study the metals, even the flakes, the sand-blasted attributes that you see in real life. I can analyze this because if you don't know that something exists, you can't add it to your 3D work. So, and I know what you're saying. Oh, but there's this really cool artist that I follow, and all I have to do is follow their work. But what you're doing is copying from a copy. If you're not copying from experience, it's going to be, I feel you're always going to be missing that little extra something that makes your work really stand out and make it feel like those subtle nuances are present. Here's another example of product photography. So I love details. Anything that allows me to really get close to something and really study it. What makes this thing amazing? What makes this thing important? I want to know. I'm very, very curious in that way. And digital photography allows me to do that and do that quickly. So look at these details. Look at the imperfections. Look at the dents. Those tell a story. That's possible. Maybe these glasses fell when someone was climbing Mount Everest. And now you remember that dent, and now that dent has a story. And I'll be talking about this further in my talk about why story is important to your work. It's not enough to just create a beautiful piece. Your beautiful piece needs to say something. That's what art is supposed to be, about expression. So now we've talked about that. We've talked about film photography. We've talked about how amazing that is. We've talked about digital photography, how amazing that is. So why should I even bother with 3D and visual effects? I mean, you basically said, oh, you can get organic mood and emotion with film photography. Oh, and you can get really, really fast results from digital photography. So why even bother with 3D? I'll tell you. This image you're looking at is a 3D image. This is a model. What makes 3D amazing is not only can I craft the look of this amazing product, but now I can rig it and I can animate it and I can do things to it in 3D that would be impossible to do in real life. But having been able to do it in real life, those imperfections I was talking about, those dents, those scratches, all of those really nuances that make humans relate to one another, those things I can add in 3D. So now, those imperfections that we saw in the photography, I'm using that as inspiration to add it to this render. And now this render doesn't look so canned, right? That's what it's all about. And of course, 3D comes with many, many, many other possibilities, such as character work. We can do grooming, we can do look dev, we can do sculpting, we can do garment construction, we can do just about anything you can think of in 3D. But I'm still using those fundamentals that I learned at Olin Mills way back when, about 3-point lighting, where I couldn't move it. I'm using those things to inform my 3D. So now when I place a light to light her lips, I know why I'm placing that light. And that's very, very, very important. Nuances like waves. My waves don't look like that. I wish. But I can make it in 3D. So, and that's what I did here. And again, I'm studying real life. I'm pulling all of my inspiration, everything that I love about life, and I'm infusing that in my work. Things like pores, things like stubble, things like, you could call it imperfections. I mean, it's kind of like a taboo term because what's perfect anyway? But those things we can add. the waves, the stray hairs. All of those things are really, really important to make this piece feel relatable to your viewer, which is probably another human. Then let's talk about modeling. There's actually more than three. There's many phases of 3D that a project goes through. You have modeling. So we have this shoe here that I modeled from a cube. We call that box modeling. And from that cube, I start to make cuts and subdivisions. And then I move those vertices and I place them around and I make them take the shape of the form that I want. And in this case, it's a shoe ball main. Once you've modeled, now you have to unwrap it. Just like a fish, you would fillet a fish and spread it open, or a box. If anyone who's actually made a cardboard gift box, you sort of have those, it's laid out flat, and then you build it and construct it and assemble it. And that's what the UV mapping process is in reverse. So this pattern that you see on the shoe allows me to know how my UVs are being oriented. So this lets me know that all of my faces are equivalent. So the sole of the shoe versus the upper of the shoe versus the toe box of the shoe, all of those things are going to handle textures as I would expect and not stretch or warp. Then we get into materials. Adobe Substance. Anybody know about that? Anybody heard of Adobe Substance? Substance Painter, Substance Designer, Substance everything, because Substance is amazing. It allows you to do procedural things that just blows my mind. In this case, I'm using Substance Painter to add materials to that model that I just showed you the wireframes for. And now we have a final render. So that's modeling, that's texturing, actually that's modeling, that's unwrapping the UVs, that's texturing, adding materials, and then lighting, and then final rendering. And by the way, I used Omniverse to render this. So shout out to NVIDIA. And I would be amiss if I did not show love to Vans. So this is another render that I did for fashion. Now, if you've been following my work at all, like at all, you will know immediately that I have a soft spot for fabric, but specifically knitted fabrics. That's my jam. I absolutely adore it. I don't know why. You know how some kids like candy corn and other kids like candy canes? I don't know why. It's just a thing. But knitting is my thing, and I absolutely love it. And I love trying to pull all of those nuances and those subtleties into 3D, which isn't as easy as one may think. Down to the fibers. I told you that I love details, but I didn't tell you how much I love details. Even though I know this knitted fabric is, from a distance, it's a piece of cloth, I want to go down to the fiber level. I want to see just how much detail I can extract in 3D that resembles real life. Those 100 megapixels that I told you about in the photography chapter, that allows me to know what these fibers look like. So that's how digital photography is informing 3D. For this, I'm using procedural rendering in Houdini. So that's a thing that I'm going to get into a little bit later. But just know all of this is inspired by photography, which again, it's not photography versus 3D or 3D versus photography or film photography versus analog. It's using all of that knowledge to craft an expressive piece of art. More abstract pieces. Once you have the tools and you know the rules, then you can start to break it. Now my imagination can fly. Now I can start doing things that may not be possible in real life, and it may not be air quotes realistic, but it will have an air of realism to it. And that is what allows people to relate to the work, which is really, really important. This is one of my latest pieces. It's Halloween. I'm not really a gory person. I'm not going to do a lot of blood and That's not my thing. But I do love dinosaurs and I do love knitting. So guess what? You get this guy. Happy Halloween. All right, so we talked about photography, film photography, digital photography, 3D, visual effects, cloth, modeling, texturing, lighting, rendering. But how does that relate to fashion? I mean, you can't wear a 3D thing, can you? I mean, if you 3D print it, yes. But in general, it's a bit hard. So let's dig into this. About 9 months ago, I had this crazy idea. And this was after many, many years of being obsessed with 3D knitting. I said, I want to learn how to knit myself by hand in real life. I'm not a grandma, but I want to know how to knit. So I embarked and then I started. Then I was able to build this scarf. And I have to tell you this. What I learned is, you remember I was telling you about how photography informed 3D? Well, now that I'm knitting in real life, it has made my knitting in 3D even better. Because why? Because now I'm understanding it more at a deeper level. This is Marvelous Designer. So I can now pre-visualize, how do I want this box to look that I'm going to put this scarf in real life? But how do I visualize that before I purchase any materials in real life? That's where 3D comes in. I'm using Marvelous Designer to pre-visualize how the packaging will look for this scarf. Now, a few things I'm doing here. One, of course, it's modeling. You have to model the scarf, in which case here I use Marvelous Designer, and then you have to texture the scarf, which I used Substance Source. And if you haven't found out about Substance Source, you should. You're able to take a photo of anything, like anything. I'm talking about the walls. I'm talking about your skin. I'm talking about a piece of fabric. I'm talking about a metallic surface, anything. And you're able to import it into Substance Source, and Substance Source will make a believable texture from those photos. Again, how photo is enhancing 3D. So now when I apply that texture from a photo through Substance Source, I'm able to apply that onto my model. And now I have something that will give me a really good idea of how this is going to look in real life without having to spend one single penny. So I'll just kind of show you a little bit of how cool Marvelous Designer is. It's real time, and I can move around in the scene, and I can look at the box from many different angles just to make sure the box isn't going to overwhelm the scarf, but the scarf is going to pop, but not so much that it distracts. And what about the inner cloth? What does that look like? How can that supplement the scarf without outshining the scarf? All of those things I can do, again, in 3D, that will inform the real thing later. So doing things like moving it around. How am I going to pose it? How am I going to situate it? How am I going to position it inside that box? I can do that all in 3D. And that's why 3D is so awesome. Now, about 10 months ago, I get a phone call. Actually, it was a message on social media. A lovely lady from Zydro. She said, "Hey, Rob, I have this really cool project, and I would love for you to be a part of it to do some visual effects pieces." I said, "Okay, what is it?" And then she showed me this, and I was like, "Say less, let's go." I mean, why would I not want to work on this project? Come on. This is like me, the epitome of me. So I said yes. And the company Zydro, amazing company, creative studio, actually is in the UK. So here I am in sunny California, there in the UK, and Givenchy is somewhere else. So how do we make this project work when I can't physically get my hands on the shoe? What I ended up doing was, in my house, I got yellow yarn and I knitted it by hand myself. And then I took photos of that yellow scarf and I studied it. I studied it like I was going to be tested on it the next day, like over and over and over at the fiber level, at the most microscopic level you can think of, looking at the fibers, looking at how the weft and the waft sort of played on each other, and really, really analyzed it. It allowed me to do something like this. So now I'm using visual effects to simulate this cloth, and I'm using photography to inform the knitting, and now I'm using 3D to render this thing. So the brief was to make a cloth that would be impressed by the shoe itself. So this piece wasn't about the shoe, it was about the impression of the shoe. So why all of this? This was the launch on Givenchy's website earlier this year. But they also wanted to do an installation in Paris. This is what they did. So it was a interactive floor that and had the animation of that cloth simulation that I showed you. So as the customers were walking by, it looked like the floor was alive to make the whole piece immersive. So these things are ways in the real world how all of these things are playing together. We're talking about photography. We're talking about 3D. We're talking about fashion. We're talking about all of these things. And it's not a this versus that. I'm using all of them together. And I mean, without getting preachy, that's life, right? I mean, we're all different. There's something special about all of us. And instead of trying to be you versus me or him versus her or they versus them, if we all use our strengths together, we can make some amazing stuff like this really cool installation. Now, what's next for the future? Talked about metaverse a little bit earlier, but I didn't really expound on it too much. There is a lot of topics about AI now that there's Midjourney, now that there's Dall-E, there's all these tools that allow any user to type in a prompt. I want a dinosaur eating a carrot on an island in the Bermuda Triangle, standing on one leg. Enter. And then you get 500 things that the computer is going to interpret what that looks like. And you have two camps. You have one camp, which is like, oh my God, this is amazing. And they go to typing and their Twitter fingers are like in overload. Now, you also have a second camp, which is like, oh my God, what's going to happen to my job? How am I going to get work? The computer's going to take over. Oh, you have that camp. So how do we solve this problem? I'm going to give you an example, very quick illustration, and it's about fear. Fear usually comes from the lack of understanding. So go with me here for a second. You are a toddler again. It's early in the morning. Your parent just fed you, just cleaned your diaper, and sat you in the living room while they go get ready for work. They're in the room. They have their ironing board up, and they're about to iron their clothes for the day. They put the iron on the ironing board, vertical, and then they pour water into the iron to create steam. They plug it in, and then they walk away because, of course, it takes time for that water to heat up enough for it to become steam. So they walk away. Fast forward back to toddler you. On your little toddler hands and your little toddler feet, you're crawling in the room, and you see this, what looks like 150-story thing, which is the ironing board, is really only a couple of feet. But for you, it may as well be the Empire State Building or the Mount Everest, right? And not only that, but you see this inanimate object sitting on it that looks like a monster or a dinosaur. And by this time, it's been long enough that water's heated up. So what does the iron do? And there's fire. You mean there's smoke coming out of this thing? Think about toddler you. You don't know what this is. You're looking up for seems to be miles and miles and miles. And now this thing is hissing smoke. Looks like a fire-breathing dragon for all you know, right? But then you get older and then you use that same monster to iron your clothes to go to work. So fear comes from not understanding it. So not only do you understand the iron, but now you're using it to iron your clothes to go to work to make money. Same thing with AI. It's not something to be feared. It's something to try to understand and use it in whatever way you need in order to make your life better. So at NVIDIA, this is one of the latest projects that I worked on. It's the new Ada Lovelace chip. This chip does everything. It cooks your breakfast in the morning. It sings you a lullaby at night. It does everything. It's the omnipresent thing. It's amazing. I had a very, very huge honor to work on the design of this with the amazing NVIDIAns at NVIDIA. And this is what we came up with. And of course, there's tons of materials here. And I went to the studio. I shot piano black material. I shot gold medals. I shot even a soap bubble, if you can imagine, and really studied all of those materials to come up with what you see here. Again, using everything together to come up with something that's new. This is present and the future. So what can we do next? How can we make something even better? I did a presentation a while ago about Omniverse, as well as Substance, Adobe Substance Painter, a Substance source, as well as the Substance 3D library online that you are able to use download many different materials and use them in your work. So this is the future. It's being able to visualize anything you want in real time that will inform you on what you can create in the real world. And I'm going to leave you with a few different thoughts. One, screw fear. It's not real. It's a lack of understanding. Once you understand something, you're able to use that something in order to make your life better and everyone else's. So be very, very cautious and very, very aware of your surroundings. Even the most mundane things can end up being the very next thing that inspires you to do something amazing. So that's all the time I have. I hope you will follow me. These are some of my socials on Twitter, Behance, Instagram, and LinkedIn. I love to connect with you and see how we can do something amazing in the future. Thank you so much, ArtCenter.